Rhizosorb is redefining what growers expect from phosphate fertilizer. Backed by data and built for performance, Rhizosorb helps reduce phosphorus losses, improve uptake, and boost ROI without increasing input costs. Join the next wave of growers switching to the next generation of phosphorus fertilizers by visiting phospholutions.com.
So, Lori, let's jump right in. What's your big idea?
My big idea is to strengthen Canada's food system through a national food waste strategy. That's it.
Excellent.
You're listening to the Ag Policy Connection, brought to you by Real Agriculture in partnership with the Canadian Agri-Food Policy Institute. We're connecting the dots between the people and the policies that shape agriculture and farming today and into the future.
Welcome to the Ag Policy Connection, a podcast where we talk about the big ideas and fresh thinking needed to solve the big challenges and seize the big opportunities facing Canadian agriculture and food. I'm one of your hosts, Tyler McCann, the Managing Director of the Canadian Agri-Food Policy Institute. I've been working in ag policy and politics for 20 years, and I am a policy wonk.
And I'm not, but I'm your other host, Elise Bigley, the Director of Strategic Projects at CAPI, Canada's agriculture and food think tank. In this podcast, we'll be talking to leaders across agriculture and food about their big ideas to create generational change in ag policy.
That's right, Elise. We think the time has come for ag policy to catch up with the changes happening on the farms, in processing facilities, and across the system that produces food and more and gets it to customers in Canada and around the world. We are excited to work with Real Agriculture to bring some of the big ideas for change to you. Make sure to visit CAPI's website to subscribe to our mailing list, follow us on our socials, and on YouTube to keep up to date.
And with that, let's get started. So today we're joined by Lori Nikkel. Lori is the Chief Executive Officer of Second Harvest, Canada's largest food rescue and perishable food recovery organization, where she has grown a national food recovery network that redirects surplus food to thousands of communities across the country. She's an international thought leader on food loss and waste and co-author of The Avoidable Crisis of Food Waste. Lori has also been recognized as Canada's food hero by the United Nations, and we're really excited to have her here with us today. So, Lori, welcome to the Ag Policy Connection.
Thank you. What a lovely introduction. Thanks for having me.
So, Lori, let's just jump right in. What's your big idea for us today?
Our big idea is just a food waste strategy to reduce food waste. Like, food waste is not incidental. It is a systemic inefficiency that we have built across the entire distribution supply chain model. So how do we fix that? When in Canada, in 2019, as you mentioned, we did some research and it was 58% of all food was lost or wasted that was produced for Canadians. We updated it last year in 2025, and we are doing better, 46.5%, but that's still almost half the food produced for us being wasted. And that's an outrageous amount. And it has economic impacts, it has social impacts, it has environmental impacts, and it's just a systems issue that needs to be corrected.
Fantastic. And before we dive deeper into the big idea, thanks for giving us an overview. We want to hear more about the journey that kind of led you to this idea. Like, what brought you to waste? Can you tell us a bit about your career and experience in working to reduce food waste and address food insecurity in Canada?
Sure. I mean, my story is, I was low income single parent and I needed food for my own kids. And that's how I got into the world of food. To be fair, before that, I was a bartender and a waitress. So I've always kind of been in food. But in this kind of space, it was to feed my own kids. And it was in child nutrition specifically. So I worked in student nutrition for many, many years. And for Breakfast Clubs of Canada, for Breakfast for Learning, for Food Share, for public health, for everybody. So I have a really good understanding of what's required for kids to succeed and have great adulthood because they have the right nutrients when they're young. And then to be perfectly frank, it was a lot of traveling and I have my own kids and I'm like, I got to stop traveling. I need to go to a local organization. And there was this small one in North York in Toronto and it was called Second Harvest. And I'd heard about it. I didn't really know about it, but I'd heard of it and I got the job. Which is funny because the truth is they didn't even have a job. But then I talked to them and like, well, we're going to hire you anyway because I had a good understanding of food systems. And I was a director there for a couple of years, but I realized pretty quickly on this is not a food security problem. Like we're not addressing food security when we feed people this way. We are in the moment, but that is wage policy. That is an income issue. People need money in their pockets to go grocery shopping and buy the food they need. it's great that we can support people with healthy food, and I'm very much into healthy, nutritious, perishable food. But that, when I looked at this organization, I'm like, this is the wrong lens. This is actually a food waste issue. This is an environmental issue, an outcome that is social justice for sure. Let's make sure that food is being directed to people. But I think as soon as I did that and switched the lens to this is environmental, we have a problem. The problem we're trying to fix is food waste. That shifted everything. And because back then I didn't like nobody was looking at it this way. There was this one meeting that I still talk about. Because I'm like, who do I need to know? And there was this one little conference that Kate had put together from Guelph University. And she's like, well, you need to know Dr. Martin Gooch and you need to know this. So she introduced me to a bunch of people. I'm like, okay, what are we doing about this? But nobody was talking about it at all. I'm like, well, how much waste is there? Like, what's even the problem? And there was no research. And I think that was pretty fascinating to me that, we all make assumptions that somebody's doing something or has done it 20 years ago and we can just check it out. But there wasn't. So that was the impetus of, okay, let's find out what the problem is, because you can't fix a problem until you know what it is. And that was the start of Second Harvest's real shift into who we were and why we were.
That's really interesting, about adjusting the lens. Like, can you kind of dive into what that process looked like, adjusting the lens of an entire organization, especially when no one's thinking about it that way? Like, that seems like an uphill battle.
Well, I mean, I had a couple things going for me. One is it was a really small organization at that time, so that worked out really nicely in my favor. Because the truth is, yeah, it was hard for a mind shift, right? For a couple reasons. One, we're a charity, and charities that support people with food, like a society can understand that and want to fund that. And so you have to, and I'm like, we're not doing that. Of course, we're still doing that, but we're also focusing this way. So it was just a lot of change management, and not with everybody, to be fair. It was, a handful of people that were like, no, and digging their heels in. I'm like, well, as a leader of a business, you can manage that one or two ways. My goal is always to like bring people along, get them there. And for the most part, that happened. But I mean, that was when there was 28 of us, and there was like, I think we were doing 6 million pounds of food, and there was like, and most of those 28 were drivers. And they were like, sure, whatever, Lori. So today, when we're like, it was $400 million worth of food, we're a much bigger organization. I think the change management might be a little more difficult. So I think it's just a moment in time where it worked.
Lori, do you think others have caught up to you since then? Have you brought the rest of kind of the space along?
100. I mean, people talk about it now. Like it was honestly like nobody talked about it. It was not something that happened that like in just general conversations, even in academia, it wasn't like a big pillar for them or anything. So industry, not really. Actually, to be fair, I would say almost not at all. And so for sure, we've seen a huge shift in behavior at household and industry, like wanting to make the change. Doesn't mean that the change is happening, but there's at least awareness, and awareness is, step one, know the problem, build in solutions. And this is a big idea, but it's not a unique idea. Like almost every other, G7, I think every other G7 country and others already have food waste strategies. And then they tie in other pieces of policy inside of it. So we're behind as Canada, and I think we need to catch up, and we could be real leaders here.
And is one of the reasons why we're behind in the past, and I suppose even today in some places, this is seen as kind of a social justice issue, a charity issue, when others think about it in more of that environmental or economic lens, kind of the direction that you've gone with this?
I think so. I mean, I don't know for sure, to be honest. We're just a different country, and some things are easier to manage in a smaller country with a smaller footprint. Part of that is just the enormousness of us and the small population. I always think has something to do with it. But also, there hasn't been an appetite at a legislative level. And even when we look at food waste across the country, we're like not even talking federally. Even if you look in Ontario and you're looking at organics, there's no harmonization of anything. So we have built in inefficiencies by not connecting to each other, right? To make sure that there is like one plan that harmonizes, this is what we do. So like at Second Harvest, we were talking about a compost workshop that we were building in for corporations that had asked for it. I'm like, well, that's going to be kind of difficult because what I'm told to put in my compost in Mississauga is different than what I'm told to put in Toronto, which is different than whether you have one or not. So even that, just a lack of harmonization on organic material is a problem.
Right, and I guess one of the things, so you talked about how there kind of wasn't an appetite or an interest. I think that there's this perception that, companies always try and drive down kind of waste and loss, right? That it's in their kind of incentive to reduce and kind of find higher values and do things with different products. Kind of what's that reality look like? And again, what's that journey been like talking to people to try and raise awareness of this?
Well, I mean, it's many things, but I again, I'd say let's not talk about diversion so much, and let's talk about prevention. So I think industry is very good at diversion. No, I shouldn't say very good, trying to be very good at diversion. So depending on where you are, how big your organization is, they are like looking at ways to upcycle and treat second harvest awesome. Like we have great partners across the country to divert, but where are we looking at prevention? So we work with EnviroStewards. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Bruce Taylor, but he does like case studies and goes into businesses and says, this is an area where you could really reduce your waste. And they're just frontline staff already know, right? Like they're just small tweaks that can happen on a line that suddenly your food waste is dropped. And I think there's a Campbell's soup story, a case study where it was the line was one type of product, so maybe it was tomato soup, and then during the shift change it became potato soup or whatever, and the tomatoes kept dropping on the line, and they would just throw them away. Well, that's an easy fix, right? Don't throw them away. Put them over here and use them for the. And so I think I'd save, and I know it's a podcast, but I'm like, try not to quote me on this, but I feel it was like $250,000 a year on those kind of small tweaks of prevention. So I think where we get stuck, everyone gets stuck, not we, Second Harvest, but the general we, is prevention. It's hard to articulate prevention and what the data is without actually doing it, right? To recognize what the cost saving, what the economic impact is, what the environmental impact is. So we're kind of working with the problem after it happens versus let's not have the problem in the first place.
Yeah, and I think that goes into the next question that I have nicely is, can you, just for some level setting, like what is the difference between food loss and food waste? I find that that often gets used interchangeably, and I'm sure you hear that quite a bit, but just, yeah, how do we articulate the problem?
You
How do we know
don't.
which problem? You don't.
You don't.
Okay.
In my opinion, you don't. It's food waste. I think, and so different countries are all actually moving. I sit on Canadian Standards Association. I'm the Canadian delegate to ISO. And so I'm looking at what's happening. And globally, it looks like we're all moving to food waste because it used to mean one thing. And I don't even want to go down there because it doesn't matter, right? Like it's all food waste. I think when you're looking at definitions, what we should be really focused on is avoidable and unavoidable. Peace, man. You're always going to have some unavoidable. But if it's avoidable, how are we managing it? In Canada, it's $58 billion of avoidable food waste that's happening here. Avoidable. We could be eating it. Nobody grows food or manufactures food or sells food to throw it away or buys food. So there's a systemic issue, inefficiency across this entire supply chain. How do we make this stop? That's going to happen when we have an actual strategy.
And how much kind of when you think about kind of that world today that exists in Canada and that kind of very big number that you've got, and sometimes big numbers are hard for people to wrap their heads around, right? Because it's kind of when you break that down and you think about who needs to be able to do things differently to avoid, what does this actually look like in practice? What kind of a strategy is a big thing what are the components of the strategy that drive that number down?
So I'm going to give you one example, and then I think, okay, actually, I'm going to start with this. Any strategy has to understand what the problem is. So the strategy has to measure. It just has to measure. Everybody has to measure and in the same way. And the beauty of that is this is the final year of a food waste management system that ISO is building with, globally. So hopefully that will address something in industry because they'll just tie it to their food safety standard in big industry. Measure this, set a target, and then monitor it. Are you hitting the target? Like that is step one. It's simple. Measure it and see if it's working. But 23% of all of our avoidable food waste is attributed to a best before date. So that's pretty significant. And why? We know, actually, to be fair, we don't know. we know, people that know that a best before date is about product quality. It's got nothing to do with safety. So general public assumes it does for the most part. And so people are just throwing away food. And when I think about food waste and what Second Harvest does, we're really looking at affordability as well, right? Like our job is to make sure people get fed. And so when I see low income people throwing away food because they don't understand what a best before date actually means, it makes me very angry. And it's of no fault of their own, right? Like there could be lots of barriers to this. Also, when you're struggling to just provide food, you're just in this kind of frantic kind of mode. I remember it was like terrifying. So you're not thinking about this. You're like, okay, well, the government said they had to put it on, so I must throw it away. That's not even true, right? It's not required. Best before date is not required on food that has a shelf life of 90 days or more. But there is no understanding of that. Now, the good news is everybody seems very interested in fixing that at a government level, at an industry level. At our level, how do we improve this system so that people are, I mean, it just, oh my gosh, you know how many times I get this picture of salt that is 250 million years old that has a best before date on it of tomorrow? It's like every time someone sees it, they immediately send it to me. Like, yeah, it's ridiculous. So understanding that problem and then managing at an industry level and a consumer understanding level.
You mentioned everyone's interested in fixing the best before dates. Is that something that's been like a long-term desire to fix, or have you seen kind of a shift?
I think there is a shift. For sure, like Second Harvest is leading something with a bunch of retailers who are all very invested, and yes, we should do it, and manufacturers, and some of them don't even have them. So we're seeing that. The challenge is with every big shift, you have to check out, okay, what are the unintended consequences, which is, then like it's a consumer awareness campaign as well as just taking them off. You can't just take something away and not have people understand it. What is the capital investment cost? We just did relabeling. New labeling was required for industry, and so they're kind of feeling a little bit of heartburn from that last one. so there's that. But no, I am so impressed by the number and these are big global businesses that are all, and I also think in Canada, it's because we don't have them, but there's getting a push globally from other industries where they don't have this, right? Like they have other countries where they have best before means quality, sell by means safety. So it's very clear. If it says this, don't have it. That is like a 2-year, 3-year date, even if it's good 50 years, whatever. Any good is still better.
But Lori, how much of that is gets to be a consumer issue as well, right? Because I think when we all think about going to the grocery store, we all look for these dates that are there. So I know it's easy to say we should get rid of them, but I've got to assume that consumers would push back against that.
100%. There has to be a consumer education piece to any of this, like in a big, right? And it's difficult because we live in 2026 where content is everywhere. It's not like, I know, I'm very old, but back when there was 12 channels, it was really easy to educate a population. So there has to be a bunch of money tied to that. But you're absolutely right. It's a consumer campaign in addition to everything else. I mean, that's the biggest pushback is how does general population understand this? Well, they misunderstand it now. So we got to try.
Do we put too much pressure on consumers in all of this, Lori?
On food waste?
On their understanding of these issues. I mean, we often think of this, I think, from a broader agriculture world, right? Kind of, we've got this idea we need to have public trust with consumers, but I guess I always am a little bit skeptical because, like, a consumer just wants to go to the grocery store and buy food, right? Like, I don't think the average consumer really thinks too much about where the food came from or how it was made.
That's a fact. That's a fact. Yes, I guess, but we created this, right? Like we created this problem, so now we have to fix it. And it just is what it is. For sure, we're putting a lot on the consumer, but also like we're Canada, right? We have a lot of newcomers in Canada where they don't have these industry standards. So we've also kind of set them up to fail, right? Like, well, where I came from, they didn't have this, they had this kind, but we only have this one date. And so they just assume it means this. And so that's not fair either because we're actually changing their perception to be negative about best before dates. I don't know why I'm using my hand like this, but so the answer to that is yes. We do put a fair bit of pressure on the consumer, but it is a consumer that's always going to push back, right? So if you don't educate them, they're going to push back to retail and to food service and to whoever and say no. But if industries all aligned and we're all aligned, this is a problem for everybody. It's not like one industry or one different organization. Everybody's aligned and has the same message and has that campaign in store as well as, media everywhere. It doesn't have to be so disjointed. If it's a really clean campaign and it's like up for a couple of years, people shift, right? You can change. Your brain shifts.
I want to jump back to, the conversation of it's easier to educate consumers when there's 12 channels versus now. I mean, we think about that a lot at Capian in the egg sector. Tyler mentioned like reaching the consumer. What does that mean and how do we approach that? Do you see kind of us in this digital age as maybe an opportunity to shape how we educate consumers? I know you mentioned there's many channels, so that makes it more difficult to navigate what education, but just wondering your thoughts on that. Like, how do you approach that in this
I think it
age?
depends on what you're educating them on. I think when you're talking best before dates, you know where they all are? They're all at the grocery store. So it doesn't have to be a digital campaign. It's nice to have one like for online shopping. So put it on Instacart, put it on those pieces as well. But everybody actually goes to those places. So if you have a consistent campaign throughout all retail or the majority of retail, then they will learn. It's okay to buy this because it means this. So I think general education, I think is very difficult because there's never a place where everybody all is, honestly, except for often grocery stores. They all have to go, or your doctor's office. There's just very few places.
For the grocery store, you'll go more often, hopefully.
Oh, 100%. Or do you have a captured audience that most people are going to go to, and it's not that many places.
Wow, yeah. No, that's interesting. When thinking about your big idea for national food waste strategy, why why is it needed now, more than ever?
I think now is a great time because we know that Canada is working on a food insecurity strategy. A food security, oh my gosh, I said insecurity. Sorry, that's part of my job. A food security strategy for Canada. And this is a really important pillar that impacts many of those pieces. So it doesn't have to be, I mean, it does have to be its own strategy, but it can be within a broader strategy because we're working on affordability. We're working on strengthening our domestic supply chains. Food waste hits everything. So this is a great moment to put it in something that's already being created and will be adopted.
But Lori, I mean, you
Oh,
talked
sorry.
about the shift earlier from environmental to, or kind of from social to environmental earlier. I think in the food security strategy, we're seeing a shift from social to economic, or at least that's what
Yeah.
we hear about where the government's going. What does that shift look like when you think about this too, and kind of the idea of a kind of a food security, like a supply security
Exactly.
strategy rather than a food insecurity strategy?
Sorry, and I misspoke when I said food
Yeah.
insecurity. It's just food security. It's a supply chain strategy. Food waste is not, I mean, it has an impact on social justice, but that's not the issue. I say look at it as an economic issue because it is, right? There is so much economic loss in landfill, in labor costs, in water. Like there's just an economic tie-in in logistics and supply chain that this is where it fits to make a stronger food security for Canada. You can't not include a food waste strategy. To have a food insecurity strategy separate, that is a very different strategy. That's a poverty reduction strategy. That's when we look at ODSP. That's when we look at wage policy. Those are two separate and distinct policies and structures. They can, talk to each other, but they're very different in my opinion.
Yeah. So when thinking about this strategy, and I know you mentioned the food security strategy and potentially having a food waste strategy as like a pillar within the strategy, who should be at the table?
Well, who should be at the table, really? Might be easier. I mean, obviously, ag has to be at it, environment, PMO's office, like innovation has to be in on it, transportation has to be in on it. Like Honestly, I think often it's a better question who shouldn't be there because this impacts pretty much every ministry to some degree. Like the depth and level they need to be involved will vary 100%. But I think everybody's got a part to play and can inform it to some degree.
And does this need to be a government kind of strategy, or what's the role? Again, you've talked a lot about this being kind of a supply chain processing issue. Where does the kind of the private sector food processors fit in this?
Yeah, I don't think we should ever have a government policy that doesn't have industry involved in it anyway, right? Like you can't just make policies and assume that they're going to be taken up by industry when they don't have a voice. So industry has to be part of this or it won't succeed. And I do think
But
government has a role to play to lead it, right? Like let's make sure all the players at the table. There are some regulatory things that have to happen, 100%. But let's define what those are with being properly informed and having like really strong representation from industry who are saying like, yes, you can implement this, but these are the unintended consequences if you do that. So it's not one or the other. It has to be joint.
and Lori, don't want to kind of put you in a position where you're telling tales out of school, but it is worth kind of acknowledging that you sat around the Food Policy Council that I think was supposed to do some of that. I think if you look at kind
Yep.
of what, I mean, the CFA, I think, was calling for this to be created, like 15 years ago to do something like that. I think it was released with kind of a relatively big fanfare. The Food Policy Council was announced, and then it seems like we didn't kind of see, at least externally, kind of what came out of that or kind of where that went. Like, what are some lessons that you, maybe the right better way for me to ask the question is, what are some lessons that you learned from your experience in that council that we should think about doing differently this time as we think about food security, food waste, and where this goes next?
I think I think intent is always great. I think the intent was absolutely wonderful. Don't get me wrong. I think the people at the table were not the right people necessarily. Some of them were, some of them weren't, and there was a real lack of industry at that table. So that would be my big highlight is again, like you can't do something to someone. You have to do it with them to get buy-in. And so I think that was a miss. And I'm not sure how invested the government as a whole was in it because it kind of
Mhm.
just stopped. And so it exists, it doesn't exist, and I'm like, I'm not really sure. I'm not going to point fingers. It's not tales out of school. I don't
No.
think it's a secret that there was a lot of really smart people doing some really great work and doing the best we could. And we did have some really great insights, and we put together a strategy for child nutrition. So I would say actually there was a really great outcome because we did get a federally funded. The feds finally came in to support child nutrition, which is absolutely normal in every other country in the world. So that it took us this long is fascinatingly bad to me. But the other thing we did come out with was a food waste strategy. So that exists. It was built, informed by industry in a way like, industry talks to me and talk to other people, but not informed by industry like industry was literally, big industry was sitting at the table. And I think that was a miss.
I think we think about that a lot in the work that we do, and that making sure that when we're bringing people together to come up with solutions, you've got to have the right people with the right skin in the game, but you also have kind of a diversity set of voices that are there. I mean, one of the things that I guess I'm kind of really trying to wrestle with a bit with this, Lori, is that I mean, let's go back to that really big number that you've got, $52 billion of food loss and waste, like 58, so
8.
$58 billion. You would think that would be a really big issue for the people that are effectively losing that money, that are seeing that like that should, if you needed a compelling reason to do something, kind of $58 billion in waste should be a pretty compelling reason. How come that's not enough to get action on this? You're the wrong person to ask, as it is
You tell
what
I
you.
am the wrong person to ask, right? Like there's always going to be waste, period. Like that's a fact, right? We're going to have, bumper crops that are going to happen every year. We're going to like that's just going to happen. You're going to grow more or produce more because things happen, right? Like, and we're living in a world of right now real environmental issues where we're having wildfires and floods and droughts and all that. So now more than ever, there actually is going to be more production to accommodate for those hits. But why is it happening? I think it is happening to some degree. I just don't, because we know it is happening. So I should start with that. It was 58, it's 46.5. We know it is happening. So peace, great. Could it be happening faster and more? I think it could be. But like every big idea, it takes time, right? Like moving the ship takes a bit of time and understanding the problem and then understanding, what is there? There's going to be a capital upfront cost to everything because there always is when you're making these kind of shifts. So how are we incentivizing people to do that? How are we regulating? And I'm not a fan of regulation, so I'm not like say regulate, regulate. I'm not just like, but how do we ensure that industry is doing this? And if the economic piece isn't driving them yet, and I think it is to some degree, but not enough, then how do we educate them that, more needs to be done?
Is it just thinking about why there, isn't that number isn't compelling for change or why it isn't? Do you think it's where the food is wasted that's the issue? Like at production and processing, it's kind of built into the status quo of business. Like this, we're going to lose that. And does there need to be some kind of incentive? Like what needs to change within that? Because it seems like it's pretty entrenched in that um,
It is.
system. Yeah, what?
And you're right. It happens further down the supply chain, further up the supply chain. Anyway, producer, manufacturer.
Yeah.
It happens more because the value of the food is less than retail, right? So retail, you're seeing that value as increased. It's less over there. So how big is the hit when you're a producer or a manufacturer versus if you're food service or retail? So I think you see more change in those areas. Like retail, I think is actually doing a very good job of reducing their waste, um, according to the latest research. So there and food service has always been kind of doing a good job because that's where you see the price crunch. So I think part of it is that kind of piece. Also, to be fair, farmers are the best people on the planet. So when they overproduce, they're always giving it away, right? Like they don't want to. I shouldn't say they don't want to give it away. They want to give it away, probably not as much. But there's also a different mentality, right? Often where it is just good human beings trying to help Canada.
Yeah. And one thing I want to flag, I know you talked about it, you mentioned that retail is doing a good job of reducing their waste, and Second Harvest has an app that I was just wondering if you can kind of explain a little bit about what that app is and what it does and the efforts that are behind it.
Yeah. So I should have said food. Oh my God. Second Harvest started like tiny little North York business. That was very small. And we have grown and scaled nationally. And we've done that through innovation, understanding the research, but also building out tech. Like we have a product team here as well. And we're experts at logistics. Like we just are. We have our own fleet. We have our own warehouse. We have them across the country with 3PL. Like we just understand this. Like you call us, we'll make sure your food is gone. The tech piece has been really instrumental in connecting, right? Like it's really just a connector. So it does not make sense. We were sending a truck to a hotel downtown Toronto. I'm like, what? What are you sending a truck there? That doesn't make any sense to pick up a case of whatever. How do we connect these two dots? So in 2017, we built something called the Second Harvest Food Rescue app. And it is fantastic CRM. So there's so much data in this thing, like it's beloved, but it has been rolled out to like all the Sobeys banners, all the Loblaws banners. It's in metros and it's being rolled out more there. Like, so retail really has picked it up, as has food service. It's really good because then you can get a charity that is local to pick up the food. Like Second Harvest, we make sure that the charity has been audited, that we know that they're managing food safe, that they have the right equipment or the right capacity to, like, you won't ever see refrigerated product in an organization that doesn't have a refrigerator. They just won't even see it on the app. So we're that trusted source that connects those two. So last year it was we did over $400 million worth of food through our app and through our logistics. But a lot of that is just it's connecting, right? It's connecting and understanding the GHGs. So you will see how many meals. Industry loves it because they can see the meals that they've supported. They can roll up all their data to their head office so they can see where the hotspots are, right? Like the idea is, yes, it's great. It feeds people. But ultimately, the idea for me is find your hotspots, prevent it from happening. Why is there so much, because it's by category, why is there so much protein happening in this one store? Well, that's, if it's a new place, fine. They're trying to figure out their inventory. But if it's not, then that will help a business identify where's your hotspot so you can fix it. So ultimately, it supports millions, over 6 million people living in Canada last year alone. But the goal is, how do you reduce your waste?
So Lori, what are the things that we struggle with, I think, from time to time is things happen anyways. I think we talk about one of the things in Canada, and I think one of the We've talked about this in the digital ag context recently, where like these things are happening almost kind of in spite of governments and in spite of the policy framework. We like to ask the question on the podcast, what happens if we don't change or if we don't do your idea? I've just heard you talk about the great things that you're doing with your app and kind of the work and the progress that you're already making. How do you kind of think through kind of what happens without a national food waste strategy and kind of what actually changes if we get that?
I think accountability. I think that's the important piece for this, right? Like people have to be accountable for what they're doing. And if they can't be accountable themselves, then someone has to hold them to a standard. That's it. We'll continue to keep doing what we do at Second Harvest, as will, industry that is being innovative on these practices. That will continue. So I do believe that food will continue to reduce in some areas, but not necessarily all. And so having some kind of an accountability framework is always a good thing. Not a negative thing. It could be like you got to provide people with the incentives, if it's money or whatever it is, to help them get there. Because I go back to this. Nobody wants to waste food. Nobody grows food to waste it. Nobody does it to waste it. So I think part of it is a lack of knowledge. So if we had a standard, then you would have that education piece going out there. Part of it is I don't know what to do maybe, or I don't have the money to do it. So how do we help implement and educate and provide the resources that industry needs to do it? So I'm very much a carrot approach. Let's help people, but also be accountable for it.
Kind of leads into, I was wondering, yeah, how as you're implementing this, how do you deal with the barriers to change? How do you deal with that pushback of an accountability framework or maybe some of the necessary regulations? Like what's the approach we need to take there to ensure this is successful?
Again, it's awareness, it's advocacy, it's talking to everybody, getting everybody on the same page. Don't have a bunch of ideas, have one, with maybe a couple things coming down. Like there's no silver bullet, can't boil the ocean. Just like start. If you start, things tend to grow. So it's always that first step.
And does that mean we don't need to have kind of the perfect strategy? You just want to see progress in action?
Exactly. There's no such thing as the perfect anything. So let's not even try for that. Good is good enough. And a start is good enough. The acknowledgement and a start is good enough because far smarter people will be born after us, and they will also, continue on this journey to make sure it is eradicated.
But Lori, I'm curious. Like it seems like kind of when you think back at kind of your story, the work that you're doing, kind of how you're living and driving change here, like you're doing things, right? Like that seems to kind of be embodied in what you're doing. But often, and kind of especially when we think about the big ideas that we need and the generational change we need, kind of the hard part is just getting people to do things at time. And I kind of sometimes wonder if it's a Canadian cultural issue that we don't have enough people that are, I think we like to let kind of perfect be the enemy of the good almost as like a kind of a Canadian thing, and unless we can all agree on what it is. But there's this different kind of, I think, breed of people like you that are just, let's just do something, and if it works, great, and if it doesn't, let's do something else. I'm curious as to kind of what do you think about that, and how you deal with kind of people that don't think the same way.
I don't think I truly don't think about it. Like, I mean, I have conversations about it and I talk to people. I'm like, any decision is a good decision as long as you make it pretty quickly. Like, right or wrong, not making a decision is the worst thing you can do, right? You keep planning, you're never going to get anything done. So the best plans fail. And that's okay.
Right.
Don't spend a ton of time on it. Life happens. So really don't spend a ton of time thinking about that at all because I don't have time. I have to do.
You're too busy doing. So there's either a right decision or a decision you learn from. It's
Exactly.
the only two options.
And
Yeah.
take the risk. Like I am 100% take the risk. It's okay, right? Like we're going to fail. All of us are going to fail from time to time. And that's how we become better. That's how we learn. I don't know why failure is a negative. Failure is great. And the sooner you fail, the better.
I love that.
Yeah, but again, like I just really think that that's something that we struggle with lately. I mean, there's on almost kind of everything we work on, Lori, that there is this opposition and this change, and this part of the reason why we want to have these conversations like this is to kind of put more of these ideas out there to kind of encourage, maybe not encourage failure, right? But encourage a willingness to think about kind of big ideas for change.
And I think you're looking at leadership. And I honestly think in our Canadian government, we have different leadership right now, which is it's efficient, it's moved fast. And I don't think there's a fear of failure. I think make the mistake and move on. And I like that, right? I think that we're going to make mistakes. And I think as long as we all know and we're okay with it and we don't point fingers, man, and be accountable for your own stuff, learn from it, I think we're actually in a good place. But that's a leadership. And leadership does not mean boss of whatever. Leadership is at every level of every business everywhere, right? I was a coordinator, I was a leader. Like it's just leadership is a mindset. And that mindset is decisive, in my opinion. And it also has integrity. Integrity is very important.
And so, Lori, I want to ask you about one other mindset issue that I think you'll have a different perspective on. I think there's this debate today about making, we work in the agriculture space most of the time. We talk to farmers. There's kind of the sense that we need to make agriculture issues, food issues, to make them kind of more appealing and more interesting and more engaging. As much as we have a food supply chain, really I often break it down into kind of the food production part of the chain and then kind of the food consumption part of the chain. And those two things meet at the grocery store, but not really anywhere else. I'm curious as to how you think about the difference between agriculture and food and how you think about food production in the work that you do, which again, I think kind of before we dug into this, I would have thought was more on the kind of the food consumption, kind of the other end of the chain that doesn't necessarily meet with the agriculture end of the chain very often. How do you think about that? And do you think that we should stop talking about agriculture and just talk about food instead?
I think that in any industry, they have their own language. And the common language is food that everybody can understand. So it's not like, can't say it's one or the other. I just think there has to be more acknowledgement of food because people understand that. And I think we have to assume most people aren't thinking about it anyway, right? Like we're all in our own worlds thinking about, so what is the easiest message to whoever you need to get the message to? It's what matters. And often that's food. People understand it.
Sure.
Like agriculture understands agriculture. So like again, it's always, for me, it's like make the message appropriate to the audience.
Wait, sorry, where do you see yourself in the food space, in the agriculture space?
I think it's semantics, to be honest. Like I see myself as in both spaces, in all spaces. Like it's all food.
Right.
So
yeah. No.
Language.
Again, it's a little thing, but I think it's a really big thing, and I think it's something that we need to talk about more.
I think depending on the space you're in, it matters.
Right.
So for sure, you should, Tyler. 100% you should. My space, I don't think anybody cares.
Well, thank you so much, Lori. And we have one final question for you. And it's, if you had one thing you want people to take away from our conversation today and the work that you do, what would that be?
Well, it would be two things, right? And it's our vision. It's no waste, no hunger, right? If you can do something about your own waste, it's the first step is you make change in your own life. And if you're hungry or you feel for people that are hungry, recognize it, right? And do what you can when you can. This is like, we're not in a great place right now in this country with, it's shocking to me the amount of people that can't access the food that they need. They can't buy the food that they need. Terrifies me, especially at the same time, the juxtaposition of like we're wasting all this avoidable food just makes no sense. So just think about your own daily lives, right? Like just every once in a while, think about it. Because the more you think about it and try not to ignore it, I'm always surprised about people that say, and I've had this happen a lot. People in downtown Toronto say, nobody's hungry. Like what? Like, because their blinders are on. So try to take your blinders off every once in a while, recognizing that, manage your mental health, because you take them off too long, it's kind of terrifying. But yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
Be kind.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Lori. And Lori, really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us again. This is a different conversation than what we often have. I think you bring a fresh, different, pretty compelling perspective, and hope people take away from it, and hope that we see some progress on this big idea and this national food security strategy that's coming.
Oh, we will, sir. Not hopefully. It will happen. That's the mindset.
That's
No,
the mindset.
Thanks, Lori.
Good note to end on. Thank you, Lori.
okay. Thank you, guys.
Well, Elise, what did you think of that idea?
What really struck me was her focus on mindset shift and that cultural mindset shift. So it's starting with prevention instead of, we were talking about defining food waste, food loss. It's no, start with prevention. It does, and um, it's not really as important what language we use, and we can't keep treating kind of food waste as is incidental. It's kind of structural, and that brought us to that bigger conversation about how it's a food industry problem, not just a social problem. But I was really struck by her, her mindset overall, but just that leading into that mindset shift when she first started Food Harvest and or Second Harvest, and just how much of that we approach in our work at CAPI.
And I think that idea of a mindset shift is part of what we're trying to do with this podcast too, right? Is how do we think differently about these big issues that are in front of us? And this is something that may not be top of mind kind of for the average listener, but I think it is top of mind as the government's thinking about this food security strategy. I think it is, I think it is top of mind. This is kind of one of the hangovers from the food policy space that was before. I think kind of that era has ended, but that doesn't mean that there weren't kind of good things done there that could be brought forward and could be done in a big way.
Well, yeah, and that kind of goes back to one of the other points that I loved that Lori brought up of at some point you just have to act. And I mean, she's in a very different organization than CAPI, but just kind of leaning into there's only two outcomes, the right choice or the choice you learn from. And you could see that coming out of her experience on the Food Strategy, Food Policy Council, that there were some lessons learned there and there were some good things that came out. And either way, you are moving forward. And that's kind of that critical mindset that you need in a leader, I think.
Yeah, and I think I think she sums up that idea of kind of a food loss and waste strategy really succinctly as kind of a simple thing to do. But that kind of spirit underneath it of like we just need to start doing things. We need to make some decisions, and we don't need to have the perfect strategy. We need to have a strategy, and we need to start making progress is really important and really key. And so I think that's again, I really took a lot away from that in part of that spirit of let's just make decisions and let's just get on with it.
Yeah. There's one thing that you brought up, and that was the kind of differentiation between agriculture and food. And I wanted to ask you kind of where you're thinking, if your thinking has changed just in your conversations with people in the sector and where we're approaching it at CAPI. I know, again, she mentions two different organizations, and sometimes that language really, really matters, and sometimes it doesn't. And yeah, just your thoughts on that.
It's something that came up a lot for the people that were in Ottawa the week of the Future Food Conference. It was a bit of a theme, and so I think it got some people thinking and talking about it. But again, I think even the way that she kind of characterized that as kind of it's two sides of the coin, and you've got to use the language that resonates with people is a helpful way to think about it. And this is about kind of connecting with people on how they understand these things and kind of using language that people can relate to. But I think that there is kind of an underlying piece around, is this just a communication change that we're going to make where we're going to use the word food instead of agriculture, but we're going to still think about things and ask for things the same way as we did before? Or is this part of a kind of a bigger shift that we need to make to think differently? And that may mean kind of asking government to do different things or looking for a different policy environment.
Yeah, kind of a difference between talking the talk and walking the walk. So no, that's interesting. So I want to thank our listeners for joining us today. If you have any big ideas yourself, we want to hear from you. So please contact us if you have a big idea for change in Canadian agriculture and food.
And Elise, we have got some feedback from some of our past episodes. Had a great call this week with someone that wanted to pick up on the conversations that we had about plant breeding and the future there. And so we're looking at how do we incorporate some of that feedback and some of that engagement from listeners into the future episodes that we do. But please do reach out to us. We like talking about these big ideas for change.
Perfect. And we want to thank Lori again for joining us, and thank you for tuning into CAPI's Ag Policy Connection. So we'll see you next time, Tyler.
Thanks, Elise.